Hello, in this video I will show you exactly what to do in order to find the deep sky object that you want to photograph on the night sky, and then how to set up your Skywatcher Star Adventure setup that I have right here with a telephoto lens or maybe a small telescope or something like this in order to actually frame it up correctly to the deep sky object that you wish to photograph. So without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so at this point of the process of capturing a deep sky object, I'm already assuming that you have your Skywatcher Star Adventure properly set up, properly polar aligned, everything is balanced, you have your camera mounted on the declination bracket and everything is ready to go. I actually have a separate video on my YouTube channel about how to properly set up this particular device, this whole setup, in order to properly track the night sky to get the best results. So if you haven't seen that already, definitely check it out. I will put the link to it up here and also by the end of the video on the end screen. So yeah, make sure to stick around till the end of the video. And at this point, you are ready to start shooting. I'm assuming it's the night, it's a clear night, and you are ready to shoot. So the first thing that you actually need to do, and this is something that you can do in sort of advance in preparation, is that you need to figure out what is the deep sky object that you want to photograph. Because it's not like going to McDonald's and looking at the menu where you can order, I just want a cheeseburger with fries and a Sprite, please, if you know what I mean. And if you don't, that basically means is that not every deep sky object on the night sky is feasible and it's possible to shoot on any given day or any given night on any given location on Earth, because it all depends on where you are, where the Earth is with relation to the sun, so which month it is, which season it is, what time of day, what's your latitude, what's your longitude. There are a lot of factors that come into play which actually decide whether this deep sky object that you want to photograph will be actually visible during the dark night on the night sky, high enough above the horizon so you are able to take a photo of it. So in order to find out what are the deep sky objects that are possible to photograph given your current location and the current time that you want to do that, I would recommend going to a site called telescopius.com, and I have this site open on my smartphone. They also have a pretty good mobile UI, and if you go to this website, basically you can see if you let it use your geolocation, it will already find out what's your location, and then what you will see here is basically a list of deep sky objects that are sort of recommended because they are sort of like the easiest to shoot, maybe they are the largest or something like this. This kind of list is sorted by relevance, whatever that means on this site, but basically you can just use the search and you can search for whatever you want to search, and you can just use those filters as well. Maybe you want to shoot some galaxies, maybe you want to shoot some globular clusters, maybe bright nebula, maybe dark nebula. You can basically set up some filters right here in the app, and the app will tell you what are the objects that you can photograph. For instance, the first hit that I have right here for my location, which is Krakow in Poland, is the Pelican Nebula, and this is actually the nebula that I was photographing the other night. And indeed, it's pretty easy to find and it's pretty easy to photograph. As you can see on this graph right here, it shows you the azimuth and the elevation as this object moves across the night sky. So you can see that right here it is at 84 degrees south of azimuth and it's pretty high up on the horizon. So it should be possible to photograph it. And then if you click on it, you can go inside to a more detailed view, and right here you can see some photographs of this deep sky object taken by other photographers that submitted the pictures to this website. But also you can scroll down and you can see this chart basically shows you like previously, but in more detail with colors, how this deep sky object is moving across the night sky. And this yellow bar right here in the middle, the yellow part are the twilights, which is like the first half of it is the sunset and the second half of it is the sunrise. And in the middle there is a very thin black line. Actually, there is no dark night in my location right now. There is this phenomenon called white nights, which basically means that the sunset and the astronomical twilight that happens after the sunset just smoothly advances into the morning twilight, which basically means there is no truly dark night. So actually, at this given time of year, which is June in my location, it is not really possible to shoot deep sky objects. But you know, if the black bar is wider, then if you are shooting within this black bar, you will be good to go in shooting your deep sky object that you want to photograph. So after you scroll down a little bit more, you can actually right here dial in your focal length and the camera sensor. And right here I can dial in that I'm shooting with a 300mm lens. This is the lens that I have mounted right here. This is the lens that I use for my deep sky photos. This is the Canon EF 70-300. And this is an excellent lens. And by the way, everything that I use right here, the tracker, the lens, the cameras, all the gear that I use will be listed down below in the description, so you can check out those links if you want to pick up anything or just check out what I use. Those links are affiliated to Amazon, so if you use one of my links, you are basically supporting the channel, which would be definitely appreciated. So anyway, I am dialing in here 300 millimeters and also my camera sensor, which is a full frame Canon EOS R 36 millimeters sensor size. This is what I usually use to shoot. And right here you can see how your frame will look in your camera given the used focal length and given the camera sensor that you have dialed here in the settings. And you can see that this particular deep sky object, which is the North American Nebula on the left and the Pelican Nebula on the right, basically fits your frame perfectly. So with this kind of lens, I would definitely recommend trying to shoot the North American Nebula or the Pelican Nebula. They're actually very close together, so it's best to just frame them both into the same shot. So after you have that figured out, after you have figured out what is it that you are going to shoot, you actually need to find it on the night sky. You need to find the spot in the night sky roughly where this deep sky object lies. And in order to do that, I would recommend another app which is called Stellarium, and this is an app that also have a desktop version, and this is an excellent program for your desktop. Actually, it is free for desktop. I think they have versions for all the operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, I think as well. So definitely check it out. Again, links to the software and the apps that I use, everything will be in the description, so you can check it out later. And the mobile version of this app, at least for iOS, for iPhones, is actually paid, but it's very cheap compared to the things that it is capable of. So I would definitely recommend going and downloading that. So once we open this app, we need to actually change our time because currently it's like 4 p.m. So I need to change the time. I can tap here and I can just drag in order to, let's say that it's midnight. So somewhere around here, then I can tap again. And right now, what I can see is that I saw previously in Telescopius what is the azimuth of this deep sky object that I want to photograph. It is somewhere around east, so I can look east in order to find it out, but actually there is a search engine built inside this app, so you can just type the name of the deep sky object that you want to photograph and the app will actually show you where that lies on this UI right here. So in order to do that, I can just tap on this button right here at the bottom, and then I have a search, so I can type Pelican. And then I have the Pelican Nebula, and it will frame it up nicely with this kind of crosshairs, this kind of pulsating rectangle or square or whatever you want to call it. And right here I can zoom into it, I can see what's in the vicinity. And right down there you have a FOV in degrees. And this is the field of view, this is the angle of view in degrees. And this is very important because it actually correlates to your focal length. And if you want to find out how your focal length corresponds to your actual angle of view, I can recommend another website in order to find that out. This website is called pointsinfocus.com. Again, link will be below. And basically what you can do right here is you can dial in your sensor size. So in my case, it's a full frame camera. You can dial in your focal length. So in my case, it will be 300 millimeters. And then if I scroll down here, I can see that my angle of view is 6.8 degrees. And I can use that information in order to see in Stellarium how much do I need to pinch in, how much do I need to zoom in order to see pretty much the same portion of the night sky that I will see with my camera. So let's do that. All right, so if I pinch in, I can see that somewhere around 6.7, this is pretty much what my framing looks like. You can see a bunch of stars here in this app. And it's pretty hard to identify the spot in the night sky like with your own eyes just by looking at this kind of UI. So it's definitely worth to zoom out first. And then what you need to do is that you need to physically locate some stars in the night sky, one of the brightest stars, and look for patterns, look for geometrical patterns in order to find out where exactly, well, not exactly, but where roughly this deep sky object lies in between some bright stars, in order to point your camera roughly at that spot, and then you can take some test pictures and fine-tune your framing. And in order to do that, there is a very useful tool right here in Stellarium, because if you are not under a super dark night, if you are shooting with maybe your backyard, maybe you're in some kind of an urban or suburban areas, chances are that you have quite a bit of light pollution and you don't see as many stars with your own eyes in the sky as you can see in the app. So what you can actually do, you can go here, and if I click on this icon, I can go to advanced, And then I can go to light pollution setting, and basically what you can do right here, you don't need to dial in your exact Bortle class number right here in the app, but what you can just do is basically just move it a little bit up in order to make those stars, those dimmer stars, disappear. And doing that, you can sort of match the amount of stars that you see in the app with the amount of stars that you actually see on the night sky. So for instance, for light pollution 5, if I zoom it out, you can see very little stars. We can see the Deneb here, we can see Cygnus, we can see Vega somewhere here. And what you can do is just fiddle around with the light pollution settings in Stellarium in order to recognize the patterns of stars that you see with your eyes with the patterns of stars that you see right here. And if we go back, for instance, let's go to light pollution 4 and let's search again for Pelican Nebula. And we can see that it is very close to the star called Deneb, and Deneb is actually, it has kind of a bit of a story, because I don't know if you're aware of the book and the movie adaptation, The Martian. The adaptation was filmed with Matt Damon. It is an excellent story with the guy that was stranded on Mars because his crew left because they thought that their vehicle is going to be destroyed by the storm, and he's basically struggling on Mars, and he uses Deneb in a very clever way to, well, I'm not going to spoil it, you just have to read the book. I will put the link to the book as well in the description. So anyway, in terms of Pelican Nebula and North American Nebula, it is very close to Deneb, and Deneb is actually very easy to spot on the night sky. So once you have Deneb spotted, you actually need to take your rig and you need to point it at this spot in the night sky and take some test shots and see what's your framing. So let's do that. Alright, so if you have watched my previous video, then you know that I was recommending to not mount the camera using a ball head, because normally if you use a ball head, you can just loosen the ball head and basically move it around in 3D space in order to point the camera literally like pretty much anywhere you want. But we are not using a ball head here for two reasons. We are not using it because it would make the entire setup less sturdy, more susceptible to wind, more unstable. And the second reason is that if you are using a long focal length, it is actually extremely hard to fine-tune your framing by just loosening the ball head and moving it around a little bit. Even the slightest movement with the ball head will result in a very large shift in your framing. And if you have your framing perfectly and you tighten the ball head and you let it go, chances are that the ball head will slightly sink down and it will basically ruin your frame. So it's definitely not recommended to use a ball head with this setup, with deep sky astrophotography, with long focal lengths, because it's just impossible to frame it up the way you want. So we're not using the ball head, and the way we are going to frame our shot the way we want is that we want to loosen those both clutches. There's one clutch right here, this big black ring, and then there's a second clutch right here. So I'm also loosening that, and then you can just move it around. You can rotate it like this, and you can rotate this guy like this. And because those two axes of rotation, one is right here and the other one is like right here, so one is right here and the other one's like this, they are orthogonal, which means that they are perpendicular, and using those two axes of rotation, it is like mathematically proven that it is possible to point your camera anywhere in the 3D space. So it means that you can point it anywhere in the night sky. So you can just rotate it around in order to find the position that will ensure that you are pointed at the correct place. So for instance, if I wanted to frame our shot sort of away from this camera that I'm filming on right now, I would have to move it around like this, then move it around something like this. And that means that I'm pretty much straight away from the lens of this camera. Then I can tighten this clutch, I can tighten this clutch, and then I am pointed. Let's assume that I am pointed at the deep sky object that I want to photograph. But there is one problem. As you can see, the camera is sort of in this funny location because it's backwards. It is also a little bit diagonal, and it may not be the frame that you want to shoot. But if you're shooting astrophotography, it's not really that big of a deal because there is no horizon for reference. So it's not like your horizon is suddenly up top. You're just shooting a small, very tiny fraction of the night sky, and it just happens so that the deep sky object is sort of rotated around. But who knows anyway what's the orientation of the object that it should be. It's sort of subjective. But if you are using a ring mount on your lens, like I was recommending in my previous setup video, then what you can do, it's actually really interesting. You can just loosen this screw, and then with this screw loosened, you can actually rotate this around, and look at that. you can dial in any angle, any sort of roll angle of this camera right here that you want. And if you want to make it like straight up here, I can just tighten it. And then at this point, my camera is pointed where I want it to be pointed at. And I have dialed in my rotation. So the orientation of the deep sky object that I want to photograph is basically the way I wanted it to be. All right, so at this point, we are actually ready to take some test shots. And what I would recommend to do, especially if you're like a beginner and you don't have a lot of experience, is to use a zoom lens, because with a zoom lens, and let's rotate it around so you can better see what's going on. So let's release it again, put it up here. Let's put it like this, tighten, loosen this guy, rotate it around. Okay, so we are back up. And what I would recommend you to do, if you're a beginner and you have a zoom lens, is just zoom your lens all the way down to the widest focal length, which in the case of this lens, it's 70 millimeters. And then with 70 millimeters, take a test shot and then look at the image. I would recommend to use relatively fast shutter speeds, like maybe 1 second, 2 seconds or something like this. You definitely don't want to use the final shutter speed, which would be like 2 or 3 minutes on tracker like this, because it would be such a long process in order to find the correct framing. So just crank up the ISO all the way up to like, I don't know, 25,000 or something like this. Then use a fast shutter speed in order to take a few test shots. You will be able to see the star patterns. And once you have decided on your final framing, then you will go the ISO way down to like 800 or something like this and crank up the shutter to like 2 or 3 minutes, and then take the actual shots. So at the phase of taking test shots, like I said, the first thing that I would do is just zoom the lens all the way down, take a shot and look at the stars that you see in your shot and try to identify those patterns. Try to identify the stars that you see in the night sky with your naked eye, and try to identify the stars that you see in the app in Stellarium, and try to fine-tune your framing. And at this point, if you are fine-tuning your framing, you can actually turn on the tracker, just set it to celestial tracking, because right now when we are fine-tuning our position, we don't want the night sky to be shifting in the frame just because the Earth is spinning. We want the tracking to already be going on, because that way, if we are fine-tuning the position, we are keeping the same thing, the same framing basically in your camera, if you know what I mean. So the tracking is on, and in order to fine-tune your frame, what you can do, instead of fiddling with the ball head like I previously said, you can use those 2 arrows in order to rotate the camera, rotate the tracker around this axis very slightly. And then there is a knob on this side of the declination bracket in order to rotate the camera around with these axes. And you literally just need to press here and hold, and as you hold the camera, the entire tracker will rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise. And this movement is very tiny and very gentle. But if you are using a long focal length like 300, 600 or something like this kind of movement will be a perfect speed in order to frame up the deep sky object that you want to photograph in the center of your frame. So use those arrows to move, to rotate around this axis, and then use this screw in order to fine-tune the rotation around this axis right here. And take another test shot, take another test shot. It is an iterative process, and once you have your deep sky object in the center, then you can actually zoom all the way in. In case of this lens, this will be 300 millimeters, but be careful that after you change the zoom, you will probably need to refocus. And of course, we are focusing manually for obvious reasons. If you don't know these reasons, check out this video. But what I mean is that after you zoom in, you need to refocus in order to have your stars tag sharp. And then you can also fine tune your position using the arrows and using this screw right here. And when you have your framing dead on center, or maybe the framing that you want not necessarily in the center, then you're pretty much good to go. So in this situation, when you have everything framed up, make sure that everything is tightened, make sure that everything is properly set up. Definitely don't want to be moving the tracker at this phase because it will screw up your alignment. So make sure that the polar alignment is the way it should be. And then you are just using these arrows and this screw in order to fine-tune the exact framing. Then of course plug in an external intervalometer like a Pixel TC252 into your camera, and start taking your shots and hope for the best that, there's no wind blowing into the tracker which would mess up your exposures. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I had to share for this video. So if you like this video, make sure to leave it a thumbs up. I will really appreciate that. Also, leave a comment down below if you have any questions or if any part of the video was confusing to you. I will be more than glad to answer you. I pretty much try to answer every single comment I get on YouTube, so just don't hesitate. Ask away. And also, in the meantime, you can check my other videos. I have a bunch of astrophotography related content on my channel already, and I pretty much upload new videos every single week, so definitely also consider subscribing to the channel. And in the meantime, if you haven't seen my previous video about setting up the Star Adventure, definitely check out the video right here. I also have a video about editing Milky Way photos from the tracker, so you can check out the video right here. And see you next time. Clear skies. Bye bye.